Thank you, ladies. Good morning again. It's 11 o'clock. Okay. Paying attention to the time. How's everyone? Good. It's been funny because this past week, I have had a couple different conversations about worship. It's going to be one of the primary things that we get into today here as we talk today, as we continue in this study through the Gospel of John, and of course the central theme in John's Gospel being the fact that he has written his Gospel in order that those hearing it, those reading it, might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. So all that is taking place in John's Gospel, and as Angela even shared with us from the end of his Gospel, all the things that he's writing, he's doing in order that people might believe that he is the Son of God. And that is what Jesus is up to. Last week we started in John chapter 4 on that very interesting narrative with Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. And we are going to pick up there again today where we left off. We made it down through verse 14 last week, and we're going to pick up this week in John chapter 4, verse 15 to 26. And I have titled this sermon, Wells, Weddings, and Worship. And you might be wondering what all three of those have in common, and I'm so glad you asked, because we're going to find out here together today as we move through the text. So you will remember that Jesus was traveling with his disciples from Judea down in the south of Israel up to the land of Galilee, where he is from and where he lives. And it says in the text that he had to go through Samaria. We talked, of course, about the fact that he didn't have to go through Samaria. It was very often Jews would go around Samaria. But Jesus, not because that was the only route, but because that was the route that God told him to take, he went straight through Samaria, where he had a divine appointment with this woman at this well. They began talking about what this woman thought were natural things, natural needs that she had, primarily that being water, the fact that she would have to come out to this well every day to draw water for her household, whatever that household was and whatever it consisted of. And we realized that she was coming at this odd hour of the day. She was coming in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day, when most of the women would come in the morning. And something very curious going on with this woman. Why is she there getting water in the middle of the day when it's the hottest part of the day? And why doesn't she come in the morning? And we talked a little bit about why that probably was last week, but we're going to get into the certainty of it this week. And Jesus and this woman were having a conversation, and he asked her for water, and she said, there's all these reasons that you shouldn't be talking to me right now. One, you're a man, and I'm a woman, and that is not kosher in this day and age for men to talk to women out in public. You're not supposed to be doing that. Two, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan, and people hate each other. You know this, and this is a very interesting thing here, that you're sitting here talking to me, and then you're even asking me for water, and you're going to drink out of my jar, out of my cup, my spoon, whatever it was that she had. She's very confused, and Jesus keeps turning the conversation from the natural to the spiritual. And we talked about how John, every time you see water in the Gospel of John, it is an allusion to the Spirit. He uses water in his Gospel over and over and over again. Every time you see water in the Gospel of John, it is a metaphor for something spiritual that is happening. And right at the heart of this interaction that's happening between Jesus and this woman, there is a spiritual encounter happening. We built all the way up to that last week, and it is right here, starting in verse 15, where we're going to see exactly what it is that's going on. So if you have your Bibles in John chapter 4, and picking back up in verse 15, this is after Jesus said, if you knew who it was that you were talking to, you would ask me for water, and I would give you living water, so that you would never thirst again. And the woman says in verse 15, Sir, give me this water, so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. And the story has now moved from, if you remember, it opened with Jesus asking the woman for water, and now the story has moved to the woman is asking Jesus for water. She seems to have at least a vague inkling of the fact that she is the one that is in need here and not Jesus. And while she doesn't quite understand what Jesus is getting at just yet, he has at least piqued her interest enough that she's willing to bite on his offer. So he keeps talking about this living water, and she just finally says, okay, if you have the living water, she said, give it to me. Give it to me. I'll take the living water. And she says, so that I don't have to get thirsty anymore, and I don't have to keep on coming out here to draw water. And it's interesting that she puts that little point in there at the end, so that I won't be thirsty. You would think that would be enough, and that would just, if you're not thirsty, then you don't have to come to the well. But she mentions specifically, so that I don't have to keep coming to the well. And it's very easy for us to assume that her going out to the well in the heat of the day, as we had talked about last week, because she was trying to avoid everybody else from the city. She was trying to avoid social interaction. She had a bad reputation and didn't want to be around people. And in her not being around people, her going out to the well every day by herself at an hour when no one else was there was a continual reminder to her of her sin. Of the fallen and sinful and rebellious lifestyle that she either had been living or was continuing to live in now, and she was being met every day with reminders of her failure. And very likely in what she's saying here is, please give me this water so that I don't have to be reminded every single day what a failure I am. And I don't know if any of you might have some reminders that you're reminded of every single day, perhaps some area where you have failed, where you have fallen short, where you have not measured up, where you have had to make changes to your life, your regular day-to-day life, in order to accommodate bad decisions that have been made in the past. And day after day, you have to continue through the same set of circumstances, this same pattern of behavior, this same whatever, or perhaps just a constant nagging from the enemy in the back of your mind, just reminding you that you're not good enough and you don't measure up and you will never be enough. And I'm not sure if you're anything like me, but I have that in my life from time to time. And that usually manifests itself in my life when my eyes and when my mind are fixed on the natural things. When they're fixed on the need that I have every day, and when I'm not looking to the solution to that problem, when I'm not looking for a spiritual answer to these problems, then I'm continually reminded of the mess that I'm in. And this woman had the cry in her heart, might be similar to that of yours today. Give me the living water so that I don't have to be reminded every single day of my past. And that's probably in what she is asking right here. She's reminded of her sin every day. And this scene here with these two people at this well, Jesus and this woman at a well, is almost certainly reminding John's audience of something, and perhaps is reminding you of something if you are a good Bible student. There are these things in the Bible called type scenes. There's something in the Bible called typology. We'll talk about it on Wednesday nights. Typology is when you have an Old Testament prefiguring of something that's going to take place in the New Testament in the life of Jesus. And you see these all over the place. You see them in the garden first with that thing called the proto-evangelion in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where you have the serpent in the garden, and he comes and deceives, and then you're given that first gospel, and it's the presentation where he says the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, but the serpent will strike at his heel, and that is a prophecy. That is a picture there of, it's talking about what's just taken place in the garden, but it's also pointing us to Jesus. And we see these all over the place. There is a type scene, something of a motif, if you will, in the Old Testament, where you have your protagonists in any given Bible story who show up to wells at these opportune times. And it is there at the well that they meet their bride. We see this in the story of Isaac in Genesis 24. We don't have time to visit all of these right now because I'll be doing good to get through this all in an hour as it is. But Genesis 24, Isaac, and it's not actually Isaac who's there, but Abraham sends out one of his servants to a well to find a bride for Isaac, and the servant, as a representative of Isaac, shows up at this well, and this is where he sees Rebekah, and then he goes to Rebekah and prays to the Lord, says, if this is the woman, let this and this and this happen, and then this and this and this happens, and it is the woman, and he talks to her, and then she runs back to her father, tells her father what's happened. Well, not actually her father, it's her mother. Her father is gone. And her brother, Laban, tells them what's happened. And then a betrothal ensues. And Isaac and Rebekah are married. And then Isaac's son, Jacob, much like his father, when he's running away from his brother Esau after he's deceived him, he's out there on the run. He is in a foreign land. And Jacob comes to a well where he sees all of these women there watering their flocks. And Jacob walks up to Rachel at the well, and Jacob has a conversation with Rachel at the well, and he says, I have to marry you. And she runs back and tells her father, and she brings Jacob to meet her father, and then, of course, after, her father says, yeah, you can marry Rachel. Worked for me for 7 years, and then Jacob works for him for 7 years, and then during the wedding, the bride is veiled, so he can't tell who she is, and he actually tricks her and gives her Leah, the sister, instead, and then makes him work another 7 years to marry Rachel finally. And that, of course, is kind of the result of Jacob's deceiving his own father, Isaac, in stealing the blessing from his brother Esau, and Jacob is in turn deceived. But he meets his bride there at the well. And then you have the story of Moses when he is fleeing from Egypt, and after he has killed the Egyptian, and he runs out into the wilderness, and he comes into the land of Midian, and he sees this shepherd girl at the well, and she is being harassed by these male shepherds, and Moses comes up and chases off the male shepherds and then allows for Zipporah to come in and water her sheep. And Zipporah runs back to her father and says, "You're never going to guess who I just met at the well. This really hunky, handsome guy. Looks Egyptian, but he just delivered us from these shepherd guys, and we got to water our sheep today." And you have this type scene that repeats itself over and over in the Bible. You have a biblical protagonist, a guy who is not in his homeland. He is out somewhere else. And he shows up at a well where he meets a woman. And then this woman, she runs back and tells her family about what's happened. And then she ends up betrothed to this protagonist, to the leading man of the story. And very interestingly, in each one of these accounts at the well, a very key characteristic of each one of these individuals is laced into the story. With Isaac, you have this guy. He is one of the patriarchs who is completely passive. If you're ever reading through Genesis, there are big sections about Abraham in his life. There are big sections about Jacob in his life and Joseph in his life. But it's almost like Isaac just gets breezed right over. And it's because Isaac was a very passive man, it seems, apparently, even from the time that he was being offered as a sacrifice to God. When Abraham was offering him, Isaac is really just sitting there not doing anything. It's kind of one of the things that people point out about Isaac in that story, is that he just kind of willingly just lays there on the altar, doesn't seem to protest, doesn't put up any kind of fight. He just lays there very passively, doesn't do anything. His only role after that is the fact that he is old and blind and gets deceived, that his son comes in and tricks him. And at his betrothal scene, he's not even there. Isaac isn't even at the scene of his betrothal. It's some other person standing in as a representative of him who finds his bride and brings his bride back to him. So he's this very passive character. Jacob, the deceiver, of course, from the time of his birth, his brother comes out and he's got his hand grabbed onto Esau's heel. And they call him the heel grabber. And that has to do kind of with that same thing from Genesis, that the one that strikes the heel or that attacks at the heel, that is the deceiver. It's a euphemism. It's a Hebrew euphemism for someone who deceives. And he tricked Esau out of his birthright. And he tricked his father into giving him the spiritual blessing of the home. And then at his betrothal scene, he finds this woman that he wants to marry, goes to marry her, and then he is tricked. And you see this theme of deception that's there. And then, of course, Moses, the great deliverer of the people of Israel. And when he shows up at the scene, he delivers his soon-to-be bride from the enemy. Now you have this scene where we have another protagonist, another leading man who's showing up at a well that is outside of his homeland, where he is meeting this woman. And almost every first century Christian Jew who's hearing this story of this guy bumping into this girl at a well is thinking, well, surely there's some kind of marriage coming here. Surely there's some kind of marriage that's coming, and it's right there on the tip of everyone's tongue as they've been hearing this story the whole time. What's going to happen with these two, I wonder? And it's very interesting because that's where the story goes. She says, tell me, where I can get this water so that I don't have to be thirsty and keep on coming out here every day, is the request that she makes. And then Jesus shifts this right to the marriage scene. And he says in verse 16, go, call your husband and come back. And she said, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man that you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. So the scene does actually shift to marriage, as we might expect that it would. It shifts to marriage here, and Jesus says to go call your husband. And this woman, trying to kind of just avoid the topic at the beginning, just says kind of coyly, I don't have a husband. And then, of course, Jesus seizes on the opportunity to demonstrate who he is, his omniscience, the fact that he knows all, that he sees all, that he is all. And he says, you're right. You're right when you say you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands. And he says, and the man that you're living with now is not. And in the Greek, this is actually an emphatic pronoun here for you. And that means there's just emphasis. It would be in italics, you could almost say. It's not your husband, suggesting that the man that she is with now is actually someone's husband. He's just not yours. And that's what Jesus is saying to this woman. So, in the ancient world, a woman was in real bad shape without a husband. Not only was there the social stigma that went along with being single for whatever reason it is that she was single, or any woman would be single, but a woman had little that she could do to take care of her material needs. Not to mention that she must have been incredibly lonely. And there's no mention in this story of any of her children, and perhaps maybe that is the reason why she was passed off from one man to the next. But we talked a little bit about this last week, that a woman had very little control over her marital status in those days. That it is almost certainly not that this woman was just bouncing around from one guy to the next of her own free will, but that she was found to be unsatisfactory in the eyes of each of these men that she had been with. Perhaps it's because she could not bear them any children. Perhaps she was a lousy cook. That is one of the reasons that is actually written in the Jewish extra-biblical teachings that you could divorce your wife if she burned your dinner. That is actually in the Jewish teachings, not the Bible. God does not permit for that. But the rabbis, when they started adding on to it, said that that was the case and that you could do that. There's no telling for what reason this woman was passed along, but it happened to her 5 times. She had 5 different husbands, and most people, including even us, when we hear that someone has been married 5 times, we start to think poorly about that person. If you have ever known or heard of anyone who has been married 5 times, and they say, "Oh yeah, this is my 5th husband," you're raising an eyebrow, like, "Oh, wow, you must be a great wife." You think things like, maybe you just like to get around. Huh? Maybe you're just never satisfied. Is that what it is? Just keep going from one guy to the next. Maybe you just don't know how to keep a promise. You ever heard of commitment? You ever heard of that? Covenants? Remember the promises you made? Maybe that. And you start to have all of these different ideas popping into your head, perhaps, where you immediately start judging this person or looking down your nose, perhaps, at this person because you know one detail or circumstance about their life. It is far more likely that this woman was mistreated and passed around and moved from one guy to the next, having nothing to do with her own desires. She almost certainly, in each one of those instances, was looking for a place to feel secure, was looking for a place to feel at home, to feel loved, to be provided for, to have a family. Almost certainly that was her expectation each of those 5 times, and it didn't work out. And I just find it very interesting that we've heard this story so many times. I'm sure that you have heard this story. And we just get the idea when you hear this story that this woman has some kind of loose moral character. Now, at the end there, Jesus does say the guy that you're living with now is not your husband. And specifically yours, it seems. But again, like we talked about last week a little bit, the pool that you get to draw from for husbands starts to get shallower and shallower and muddier and grosser the more ex-husbands you keep on stacking on behind you. And she probably feels fortunate that there's even any guy, married or not, that would pay her any attention right now. Looking for love in all the wrong places, perhaps. I would assume this woman, more than anything else, is a victim. And I think that very often in our lives, it's very, very easy for us to look at the circumstances of somebody else's life and feel some kind of moral superiority, even some kind of strange pity. You pity them because, it's just like the pat on the head kind of pity, oh, bless your heart, that one. Instead of, if we actually really got to know people and really got to understand their circumstances and their situations and the things that they have come through, it might actually breed in us a heart of compassion for people. And I think that this woman is a perfect example of that. That as we continue to go throughout our lives and we have these chance or perhaps divine encounters with people at the watering holes of our society, that it should be in our heart and in our mind to see people through the eyes of God, to see people through the heart of Jesus. Amen. Not to look at the circumstances, not to hear the little bits that we know about them and make, I know all about you. Like we talked about last week. Oh, you're a Samaritan. I know what that means. Don't need to know any more. I know all that I need to know. You're a Samaritan. Don't need to talk to you. I know who you are. We spend the time to get to know people, to hear their hearts and to love them as God does. It's very interesting that there's a reference there to her 5 husbands. Some scholars and commentators have pointed out the fact that this might be an allusion back to 2 Kings 17:24. We talked about the fact that Samaria used to be a land that was inhabited by Jews, by purebred Jews. Those from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh used to inhabit Samaria. And it was after the Assyrians took over that the foreign invaders came in and began to pillage and to rape and to take Jewish women for themselves. And then they had children by them, and then these children were the hybrid mixed breed of Assyrian and Jew against the will, almost certainly, of any of these women and against the will of any of these people, again, victims. And then those Jews who had been able to avoid all of these things looked down their noses at them. But it's very interesting because in this passage, it says that the king of Assyria brought people from 5 different countries, from Babylon, from Cutha, from Ava, from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim. I practiced that one 3 times. Still stumbled. And settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. So it's very interesting that you have this Samaritan woman who's here at the well, almost as a picture of the entire nation, who has had these 5 husbands in the past when this land of Samaria had been basically destroyed and persecuted and tormented by these 5 different nations. Hard to miss that little detail that's going on there, but her marriages are a picture of her desires for safety and security, and she went back over and over again looking for the same thing in the same place, just like she did at the well for the water, and she kept on ending up thirsty. She was looking for safety. She was looking for security. She was looking for love, and she kept on trying to find it in one man after another, who kept on letting her down over and over and over and over and over again. And in the same way, she was going out every day. And I have to come back to this well every stinking day. I have to come back out here and I have to remember this. She was looking for the solution. She was looking to quench her thirst with something that would never quench her thirst. It's almost like drinking salt when you're thirsty. And this is the routine that she was in. This is the rut that she was in. And this is the routine and the rut that any of us are in when we try to answer the emotional and spiritual and psychological pressures and problems that come from this world when we try to pacify those with things of the world. When we try to distract ourselves, when we get feeling down and we try to do something to go make us feel happy. We try to go spend some money or watch a show or do whatever it is that's going to make us happy. Indulge in some kind of perhaps terrible addictions, because for a little while it takes our mind off of what's going on, instead of going to the source, that the living water that you can drink from and not have to worry about that thirst ever again. So don't miss this part either. It's about ready to skip it. But your shameful past and your present, maybe even perhaps, Jesus wants to engage with you, even in the most shameful thing that you have ever done. You and me, we are both included in this, that this woman is right in the middle of a shameful lifestyle. And this is right where Jesus is meeting her. This is right where he's coming to meet her. And I think that so often we feel, even though we know it and we say it, that Jesus, he will just accept you just as you are, to come just as you are. I think that there is often this thing where our shame, our sin, and our insecurities keep us from actually coming to the foot of God. I think that a lot of times we feel unworthy. I think that we feel like we don't even deserve to be in the presence of God, which we don't. deserve to be in the presence of God. You're not wrong when you think that. But the fact of the matter is that even though we don't deserve it, God is coming to meet us in the midst of whatever it is. And I would encourage you, in the same way that this woman does, to engage. When he's coming and he's talking to you, to listen and to ask. He's saying to you, I have living water for you today. And you might be thinking, even in your heart right now as you sit there, you do? Really? This is just a story. This is just one of those Bible stories. This is not for me. Surely it's not, because I've been coming to the well for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, I don't know how old some of you are. I'm not going to go any further than that. Years. And it's still there. What is going on? And if you're really asking, Jesus is really answering. So he tells this woman something about her that he can't possibly know because he's an outsider. Sure, the people in town know, but how does this guy know? He's a Jew. He's not from around here. How does he know? So she says, Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. And then she kind of moves the conversation. And she says, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. So very interestingly, she recognizes that Jesus is a prophet, and then she starts asking him about spiritual things. She realized that he was a messenger from God, a holy man, and then she immediately wanted to talk about spiritual things. And you might think that this is some kind of deflection, and perhaps it's a deflection. Perhaps it's, yes, I don't want to talk about my 5 ex-husbands and the man that I am currently in an adulterous relationship with right now. I do not want to talk about that. Let's talk about something else. Perhaps it was that, or perhaps it was she was actually taken back by, holy cow, I am standing before a prophet of God. And you know what the really burning question is that's on my heart right now? How can I get my life right with God? Do I even have the opportunity to be right with God according to you, Mr. Smarty Pants Jew, who knows everything? If you know everything, do you know this? You say we have to worship in Jerusalem, but we want to worship on this mountain right here. So what's the answer to that? Huh? What's the answer there? And she comes at Jesus with this question. A sincere question, I think. I don't think it's a deflection. And it's very interesting that as soon as she realizes he's a man of God, she moves the conversation to the spiritual. And this is something that should happen in all of our lives. It's something that happens in my life all the time. And I love it. I'm definitely not complaining. It's very fun because I get to meet people and I get to sit down and talk with people and whoever it is, and they say, oh, what do you do? Who are you? And then I get to tell them, oh, well, I am a professor over at Trinity College, and just recently I'm a pastor now at a church. It's really fun. I love it. It's great. And that's what I do. And then they say, oh. And then instantly everything starts changing in the way that they're talking. They stop swearing all of a sudden, stop making references to, movies and other sorts of things, and, really try to clean it up real quick. And of course I don't care. It's funny, but I'm like, whatever. Yeah, I know. But just this last week, we had the opportunity, Angela and I, after dropping our car off at the shop, we went over to my sister's neighbor's house, and we got to talking to this family who's around at their birthday parties and stuff, and I see them all the time, but I struck up a conversation with the husband kind of for the first time, and he doesn't talk a lot, so I was kind of like giving him opportunities, and then he just says, you're a pastor, right? And I said, yes, I am. And then here come all the questions. He said, So when he starts asking me about, my strategy for church growth and stuff, and he's like, yeah, it's nice when there's, more people's better than no people, and he says, so it's kind of like a business, it's like a marketing thing, right? Basically, just like you're running a business, right? And I was like, well, yeah, sure, there's There's some elements of that in it, and then, moves on to kind of the next thing, and the next, and before you know it, he's like, well, what about homosexuality? What do you think about that? Let's deal with that. I mean, you don't believe in women's right to choose. What about abortion? Well, that's where I was going. Women's right to choose. You don't believe in abortion, homosexuality. So all the homosexuals are all just bad. Anyone who has an abortion, they're all bad. And then he's on and on and on to the next thing. And believe me, I love this. I thrive. I wait for these opportunities to have these conversations with people. And we did. We got to. And his wife the whole time is kind of just like, oh gosh, please stop. Please leave him alone. And I'm like, this is wonderful. We had somewhere to be, Angela and I, and they had to have dinner, and we were going somewhere. But I ended up getting his number. But the fact is that this guy, when he realizes, oh, you're a pastor, wants to have all of these conversations with me, and I welcome them. And that should be the case for all of us. And yeah, I have some, a little bit of extra training, studied a little on some of this stuff, and have, know some stuff, and have looked at a lot of different, approaches and these issues, and that's what we did on Wednesday night. It's super fun. Love to hear questions and think about things from different angles, and I've practiced a lot, but we should all be practicing a lot. Your faith shouldn't be something that you just have, and I have it now, and this is my faith, and I'm just going to hold on to it until I die or Jesus comes back. But it's something that should be moving and influencing the world all around us. And we should be finding these opportunities to have these conversations and insert these spiritual truths in there, just as Jesus is doing. And the thing that I have found over and over and over again is that people want to have that conversation. They do. They have questions, and they want answers for them. And if you can show yourself to be a person who, you can ask me about those things. I'm not going to be offended. No, I won't be offended if you think that all of us Christians, it's a crazy death cult or something like that. You're like, you lay it on me. Let's talk about it. And then don't be afraid when they ask you a question that you don't have an answer for. Then you get the opportunity to make them feel good. And you say, that's a really good question. I've never thought about it like that before. Let me think about it, and I would love to get back with you on that. I have had to and still do that so many times. Best is, I learned this from one of my professors, where every once in a while, in class, it's always like, especially when you're in your PhD seminars, it's like, how smart is this guy really? And you'd play Stump the Professor, and you'd try to ask him a really I'm going to get him on this one. And then you ask him a question, and he just very smoothly, one of my professors, Dr. Warren, would just very smoothly just play it off you'd ask him, what do you think about whatever, the canonization of James, whatever. And he's like, that sounds like a really good topic for a paper, and you should write it. I've adopted that one myself. It's a good question for you to answer in a paper. Moving on. And don't be afraid to do